I'm just looking at some of his advisors and some of the Trump whisperers in his orbit who are suggesting, for example, that he send uniformed officers, either National Guard or ICE, to polling stations, which would be seen by a lot of voters as a move at intimidation.
Let's focus in, first of all, on a couple of international stories connected to Donald Trump. Despite it being less than 24 hours old, Trump has thrown the US nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia up in the air today after posting on his Truth Social platform that the agreement is totally subject to them joining the Abraham Accords. The Accords act to establish formal diplomatic ties between Arab nations and Israel. That was always thought to be a red line previously for Saudi. Asked why this condition wasn't mentioned when the deal was signed yesterday by US Energy Secretary Chris Wright and Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, his counterpart, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, said this.
Well, look, the president is always the final deal maker, as you know, and this is something that he has mentioned on numerous occasions going back. I can provide you with those statements, and he has said if they don't join the Abraham Accords, the deal is off. So we'll continue to have those conversations with our Saudi counterparts moving forward.
We don't even know if this is in the text of the deal, do we, Anita?
Right. The text of this deal for nuclear energy, just to be clear, has not been made public. So we don't know the outlines of this deal. But going back to this sudden demand this morning on Truth Social that the Saudis enter into the Abraham Accords, the problem with this, or the tripping point with this, is that Prince Mohammed bin Salman has always said that he won't sign the Abraham Accords unless there is a path to a clear, credible, irreversible Palestinian state. At this time, it's hard to imagine that serious talks can even begin on that subject. And memorably, Israel and Saudi Arabia got very close to signing the Abraham Accords in 2023, and that was disrupted by the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack, because they were upset about this, because they felt like the Palestinian view of statehood was not being addressed. So this is going to be a really interesting stumbling point, and this may prove to be a deal breaker, to quote Donald Trump.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, as I said, Saudi's always really not been keen on this at all. Posting on X, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said Saudi joining the Accords would be an historic leap forward for peace in the Middle East. We have heard from their economy minister saying previously that his country can manage it if Saudi Arabia had nuclear powers for peaceful means. So that's not necessarily the issue. The issue is what Saudi think about this and how they feel that they've been treated by Donald Trump. If this is a complete and utter surprise, I mean, does this just come down to the art of the deal? Is that what we're experiencing here? These
are maybe what President Trump would call tough negotiating tactics, pulling out conditions at the last minute. It is also possible, I suppose, there's been a lot of pushback to this nuclear deal because critics have said that they fear this could lead to nuclear escalation in the Middle East, which is probably the last thing that region needs. So it's possible that throwing in this roadblock that the Saudis may not be able to agree to and that the Israelis are pretty cautious about could end up scotching the deal without anybody losing face. That's a plausible theory, I suppose.
Yeah, OK. All right. Well, let's stick with the Middle East now. Oil has surpassed $100 a barrel for the first time in 2 months amid fears that the Houthis could strangle Saudi oil exports through the Red Sea. Donald Trump announced that he was very disappointed with the Iranian-aligned militia group who are believed to have fired on 2 Saudi Arabian oil tankers, writing on Truth Social that in the past they've acted very professionally and smart. The escalation marks a new front in the Gulf oil crisis and will increase pressure on the US president to break the current impasse. So, of course, Saudi was getting oil out of the region via the Red Sea. So that basically meant that they could ignore the Strait of Hormuz. But now with the Houthis getting involved, that has really jeopardized that operation. It was thought that the deal with Trump, the nuclear deal, was Donald Trump sort of trying to make amends somewhat for that or trying to do something positive for Saudi. But this has affected the price of oil. This movement it's the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, isn't it? This has affected the price of oil. And Trump is not going to like this.
Well, who knows what Donald Trump is going to think about this? He's memorably said that affordability doesn't really concern him, but it does concern American consumers who are looking at $4 a gallon. That's $1 a liter right now for petrol, and in this, fallow time in the year when families are traveling to see people. So this is a very bad time for oil prices to be, at record highs. So and also, all of these back and forth agreements, all of these moves by other forces in the region are really complicating the landscape of the Middle East more than it was even before, which is to say it was already complicated before. So, I think the upshot of this is going to really influence American voter opinion, because we're about 100 days out from these crucial midterm elections. And this is going to be used by challengers to Trump's party to show that, the Republican Party, they'll say, has not done enough to help American consumers.
Okay. We also heard from Donald Trump that he is close to a decision on his largest yet attack on Iran. He's deciding whether to launch a massive attack on the scale larger than strikes already witnessed during this months-long conflict with Tehran. This is Trump speaking to the Axios News website. Close to a decision. We're all set for it. I mean that is a pretty big escalation. We know, of course, that attacks between the US and Iran have been going on for a number of consecutive days. But what he's threatening to do really here is launch an attack bigger than anything we've seen before in this conflict.
Sure, but how many times have we been in this place, Kate, where President Trump has said this is going to be the biggest ever, has threatened total destruction at the end of Iranian civilization. He's definitely brought all of the shade in his words, but that hasn't really borne out on the ground. These attacks haven't exactly materialized in the scope that he has promised, which is, a good thing for civilians. But I don't know how seriously to take this threat in light of the fact that he didn't follow through on previous similar threats. I think we should just view this with the same amount of skepticism.
Yeah, we heard repeatedly from Pete Hegseth for a time, the Secretary of War, that they were launching a bigger than ever attack. That happened at several intervals after the conflict began on February the 28th. So you're right to urge caution on it. Just a quick line coming in from the Middle East, and that is the Kuwaiti army saying the country's air defences are currently confronting Iranian missile and drone attacks. And Kuwait, one of several Gulf countries to have come under attack by Iran since these hostilities were renewed a fortnight ago. That's just a breaking line in there.
With a
from
significant
Kuwait.
U.S. troop presence in Kuwait. So this is going to bring possibly Americans into harm's way, aside from, of course, Kuwaitis who might lose lives or limb from this. This chessboard is becoming ever more complicated. And this is, what's really interesting is the power positioning in the Middle East has changed in just 5 months as a result of this conflict. Countries that the United States used to really have a very strong security partnership with are now questioning the value of American protection and investing in American weapons. And so we've seen President Trump offer deals to Saudi Arabia, for example, which is a massive buyer of U.S. weapons and a massive financier of the military-industrial complex, possibly to assuage these concerns and this criticism. And this is definitely maybe inspiring some of these governments to see what deals they can broker out of this very, very delicate situation.
Okay, interesting. All right, let's move on to Donald Trump seizing on the news that 6,600 non-citizens in New Jersey had been registered to vote because of a software error. He's used it, Donald Trump, to further criticise the integrity of voting in the country. The number represents a small fraction of the more than 6.6 million registered voters in the state. But within hours of the announcement, Trump and other election deniers claimed it was further proof that illegals, they said, are stealing American elections on behalf of Democrats. Just explain more, Anita.
Okay, so the governor of New Jersey said that in 23 and 24, some 6,600 people were erroneously registered through the state's driving license system, where it's very common in American states that that is where you also register to vote. These were non-citizens. She said about 400 of them actually did vote, which, as you mentioned, is a pretty small number, and even smaller in light of the 287,000 people that Trump claimed were able to vote illegally, illegitimately, whatever word you want to use, in several states in his Thursday speech, in which he questioned the integrity of the 2020 election. So it's really interesting that President Trump didn't bring any proof when he made this allegation, but this is proof, undeniably, that mistakes are made. And that is what Governor Mikey Sherrill is saying, that this was attributed to a software glitch. She's called for an investigation. She's noted that this happened before she was governor and said, we found a mistake and now we're fixing it. She also made note of the fact that the 400 people who voted, who were not American citizens possibly, registered across different parties, because there's really not a monolith, and even in American subcultures about, who they support politically. So these voters were diffused among Democrats,
Yeah.
Republicans, independents.
Yeah, so no one really gained from it. I mean, is Trump laying the ground with that big speech last week? He spoke about the topic again at a school in Georgia last night. Is he laying the ground here for a result in the midterms in November that he might not like?
That is definitely a possibility. He has done that before in different elections where he's been asked bluntly, will you accept the results? And he says, if I win. So, that would be part of the Trump playbook. He might take more serious action. That is the concern. And I'm just looking at some of his advisors and some of the Trump whisperers in his orbit who are suggesting, for example, that he send uniformed officers, either National Guard or ICE, to polling stations, which would be seen by a lot of voters as a move at intimidation.
As a provocation, yeah, okay.
Right.
All right, let's move on to Elon Musk before we run out of time. He's admitted that he was too consumed by politics when he served under Donald Trump in an extraordinary interview with The Economist. Let's have a listen.
I think I got a little too involved in politics, got carried away, frankly. So the the goal with the sort of Doge stuff was to try to do something about the deficit, which is massive, where the interest payments exceed the amount of money spent on the Department of War. Like, basically, if you add up all the money spent on what is now the Department of War and the and intelligence in the U.S., that is smaller than the interest payments on the debt. So that we need to sort of take a close look at spending. And make sure that money is being spent in sensible ways and that it is not wasted or spent on fraudulent activities.
I mean, I can see his point there, but
Right.
it was quite a revealing interview, wasn't it?
Right. He also predicted that your country would be mired in a civil war within 20 years, which I thought was an interesting prediction. But going back to, his admission that he felt he was too involved in politics, that's a very thin excuse for the $150 billion that he slashed from American expenditures without any sort of grand, without a lot of reasoning and lightning speed, with a chainsaw, proverbially, and the tens of thousands of government jobs that were lost as a result of this. It just seems like a very light way to put it, considering the very serious consequences.
Yeah. Oh, I went too far, and yet you've got tens of thousands of people out of federal jobs here. Yeah. I mean, you're just reminded how when he talks, he does make sense. Like, you can understand his point, but he's certainly not a natural talker, is he? Really, Elon Musk? And you get the feeling sometimes it makes sense to him, but he doesn't necessarily make it make sense to us, if you see what I mean. But it's an interesting interview. As you say, he had some damning words for the UK as well. I think he talked about how long it had been since he'd been here, and much more besides. Anita, thank you for being with us. Anita Powell.
He also closed by insulting the interviewer, which I thought of as a classy move, but I'm going to spare you that Kate, today. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you, Anita. Good to speak to you. Anita Powell, who's a US reporter.